Who was the most dominant team in pro football history? The 1972 Miami Dolphins? How about the 1948 Cleveland Browns? They were both undefeated champions of their respective leagues. Or maybe Lombardi's Packers, or even the 85 Bears. Not so fast. There was a team in mainstream professional football that excelled beyond any of those mentioned above. My name's Darren Hayes, and I'm the author of a book, The World's Greatest Pro Gridiron Team, the 1903 Franklin All-Stars. And I'm proud to say that the Sports History Network is giving away a signed copy of this book to a lucky winner in our latest giveaway, where you can sign up at sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways and get your name entered today. Good luck.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, old sports, and welcome to another episode of the Hello, Old Sports podcast on the Sports History Network. Before we get started, I just want to remind you to check us out on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Give us a rating or a review. You can email the show at hellooldsports@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Hello Old Sports Podcast. I am Dan Newman, your co-host, and I am joined by my brother, my co-host, Andrew Newman. Andrew, thanks for doing this, and how are you?
I'm doing well. This is a fun episode because it's one where we don't really have to. I sat down on Saturday to do some prep work, and my computer needed to do updates. So as I was waiting for the updates, I was like, well, I'll just write some things down. And by the time the computer had booted up, I was like, I don't really need to look any of this up, I would say, because it's a personal preference thing. And, you know, so it was fun in that regard. And there's really no way to misstate. I guess there is a way to misstate facts, but it's not one of our more research intensive episodes, shall we say.
It is not. And we are going to we've done this a couple times before. A couple years ago, we did the top 10 NBA finals of all time. Last year around this time, we did that. I forget whether it was the top 5 or the top 10 conference championship games of all time football, NFL conference championship games. And then so tonight we're going to do Super Bowls, but we're going to do the top 5 best Super Bowls and also the top 5 worst Super Bowls, because we thought that there would be some pretty bad Super Bowls that we might want to talk about. So I'd be curious to hear from you, Andrew, what you considered sort of a good Super Bowl and a bad Super Bowl. But we'll work through it, and hopefully we'll come up with 2 good lists of 5 at the end of the night here.
Yeah, and so just off the top of my right off the battle, the way I broke it down, and originally I wasn't even going to do. I broke it down into bad ones in my lifetime, like ones that I've watched and remembered. And that was all I was going to do for bad ones. But then I did write a few other ones down for bad ones, pre my lifetime, but at least one of them I was alive, just, not consciously watching the game because I was 3. I didn't want to just go pull up the 5 games with the most lopsided final score. So I have a few where I'm like, we'll explain as we get in, but I didn't just want them to be ones that were, if they were novel in any way, even if they were blowouts, I tried to find other ones, so to speak. So I broke it down that way. And then I did it that way for good ones in my lifetime versus good ones previous to my recollection. And again, a lot more good ones in my lifetime. And as I've said, we are living in the golden age of Super Bowls and have been for right around 22, 23 years now, in terms of more often than not, the Super Bowl is a very good game.
So the first Super Bowl that I really remember is the Super Bowl. Well, let me put it this way. The first Super Bowl that I actually remember watching and having much of a clue that was going on was Super Bowl 27, the 92 season, Dallas and Buffalo, the first Dallas and Buffalo Super Bowl. I have vague recollections of Super Bowl 25 when the Giants beat Buffalo. I remember watching Norwood miss the field goal and the Giants beat the Buffalo Bills 20-19 in Super Bowl 25. Going through this list, I would say about 3/4 of the Super Bowls that I listed as potentially good Super Bowls are not only ones that are in our lifetime, but ones that I remember watching. And there was always sort of the running joke that the Super Bowl was a bad game. It was anticlimactic. And I think especially in the 80s and early 90s, the discrepancy between the NFC and the AFC was kind of a big part of that. But over the last 30 years or so, there have been a lot more good Super Bowls than bad Super Bowls. And the list of the good definitely tends to skew towards the modern day, especially really towards the 21st century.
Yeah, then it's interesting because the first ones I remember is the same, actually. The first one I remember watching is Super Bowl 27, the first Cowboys-Bills Super Bowl. I don't have the vague recollections of the two before that you do. But yeah, so we're actually in this instance pretty much dealing with the same frame of reference. But yeah, there's a few I looked at here, and if this had been in 1980 instead of 2012 or whatever, it would have been higher up on the list, but it just isn't unique in the field of really, really good games that we have to deal with here. So it's really two eras. I say it splits around, I think 97, because 97 was the first really good Super Bowl since 1990. And yeah, the next couple of years, two of the next 3 years weren't great. But then, and I'll say it now, the thing we have the most to thank for is honestly the Tom Brady Patriot era. They played in 9 Super Bowls, and 8 of them, and between the ones they won and the ones they lost, 8 of the 9 Super Bowls they played were ranged anywhere from a very good game to a generationally memorable game.
I think to me, it really sort of started obvious. You had some good games in the 80s and the early 90s, but the expectation going in was always it was going to be a bad game. And then it sort of started to gradually creep back up. 95 season, when Pittsburgh sort of hung with the Cowboys well into the second half before Neil O'Donnell threw a couple more interceptions and they kind of gave the game away. And then 96 Super Bowl, what would that have been? Super Bowl 31 with the Packers and the Patriots, with Parcells coaching the Patriots, when again the Patriots were in it until the fourth quarter, and then Bledsoe threw an interception. So, and then the following year, 97 Super Bowl 32, when the Broncos and the Packers were tied numerous times throughout the game. And then after that, and like you said, especially once you started to get into the Patriots a few years later, you sort of started to look at the Super Bowl being a well played, a good, exciting game more often than not. You kind of mentioned that sometimes when you consider something a bad game, it's not just how boring it was or how well played it was, but you also factor in sort of, is there something about it to make it a memorable game that maybe might keep it off that list? I kind of looked at it the same with the good games. It was not just, how well played it was, but also the moments, what it meant historically. This is less something in football than it is in some other sports, but a team breaking a curse. We remember the 16 World Series with the Cubs beating the Indians as one of the great World Series of all times, even though there were 7-game World Series throughout the history of Major League Baseball. But the fact that it was the Cubs breaking that curse in a 7-game series, there's a little bit of that too, whether it's a historic win, a great moment for a great player, all those types of things. I think I also looked at that a little bit when I was deciding whether it belonged on that list.
Yeah, I think not that we're going to agree on individual games, but I think we're coming from it from similar places.
So what we do is we go through, and we did this with our previous episodes on similar type of lists and similar type of topics. We sort of go through right at the beginning, and usually we would just go through sort of and say, okay, what's the next one you have that belongs on the best list? This year, we're kind of doing both. So we talk about ones that are, belong on the best or the worst list. And then I think sort of as we go through each one, Andrew and I decide whether we want to sort of put that one on the, I guess what you'd call like the semifinal list of ones to consider for this this top 5. And does that make sense? And is that sort of how we've done things in the past? And does that work for you?
Yeah, it's kind of like the Baseball Hall of Fame inductees were announced yesterday as we're recording this, and it's kind of that way. Like we have our initial list, You have to qualify for the initial list, which in this case is you have to have been a Super Bowl game that was played. Then we'll kind of pass some on to the various committees, the best committee or the worst committee. And then we will then from there we will come up with our finalists, like, our top 5 list. So you want to just jump into the first couple and just kind of go through those and see if any of those go on the list? Or
yeah, and just real quick, just sort of a quick 20 seconds of history. First Super Bowl game, Super Bowl 1966, Packers and Chiefs. That was the 7th year of the AFL, the American Football League. They, as part of their agreement to merge, they play in their first Super Bowl. So the first 4 Super Bowls are the AFL champion versus the NFL champion. And then in 1970, we get to what we know today is the NFC and the AFC. I'm assuming most people listening to this podcast know that, but so be it.
And 2 things I want to mention with that. One, and we are very aware, unlike a lot of people, and to be honest, the NFL is guilty of propagating this a lot, that there was NFL football played for 40 years before the Super Bowl. There was an NFL championship game played for 30 years before the Super Bowl, going back to the mid 30s. We're doing Super Bowls, so I don't feel like it's an unfair distinction to make. And it's like, I don't have a problem with people saying, oh, what's the best Super Bowl of all time? What's the worst Super Bowl of all time? It annoys me when it's who are the greatest teams of all time, and then they don't include anybody prior to the Super Bowl era. So A, we should mention that. B, it would be impossible. It would be very, very difficult to do anything pre-1958. You know what I mean? Like, I guess we could.
I think we should. I think we should do just the best NFL championship games. I think we should do that. In
worst NFL championship games. Worst NFL championship games would be pretty rough. Oh, this game in 1933 sucked. So there's that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, just because you mentioned Super Bowl one, anytime someone tries to correct you and tell you that Super Bowl one was not called, people will try to tell you that the Super Bowl was not called the Super Bowl until the 3rd game. That's wrong. It was by the 3rd Super Bowl, they had pretty much exclusively called it the Super Bowl. But in the first 2 games, even though the program said the AFL NFL championship game, and a lot of people referred to it that way, the Super Bowl was still a phrase that was used as early as the 1966 season going into Super Bowl one.
Yes, that is true. All right, so why don't we jump right in here? What is the first Super Bowl that you have on either your best or your worst list?
So I'll just get 1 and 2 don't go on there. They definitely wouldn't go on any kind of best list, and they wouldn't go on any worst list, even though they were blowouts. Again, we're still talking about the novelty aspect of it and things like that. I guess if you wanted to say Super Bowl 2, but it was also Vince Lombardi's last game. I don't think this makes the top 5, but I think Super Bowl 3, for historical significance and the fact that it wasn't a 40-point blowout, I passed that on to the next round. Maybe it's a ceremonial passing on to the next round, but I did list Super Bowl 3 going forward.
And I didn't. That's the famous Namath upset of the Colts, 16-7, Namath's famous guarantee going up against the Baltimore Colts, and eventually Johnny Unitas, who enters the game late in the game as a replacement for Earl Morrall. Unitas had been hurt for the whole 68 season. It just was never really a good game at all. It was obviously a historic win for the Jets, and you'll always see that on the list of the greatest games of all time. I don't know when the NFL did its 100 greatest games of all time a few years back where that was, but it was pretty high up. But I did not have that game on there. 16-7 score. The only Colts score was with 3:19 left in the 4th quarter. Keeping in mind, of course, that there were no 2-point conversions in that game. So even after the Colts scored that late touchdown and I think tried an onside kick, they were not in danger of – the Jets were in no real danger of losing the game because they were still up 2 scores after Baltimore had scored. And so Baltimore needed 2 possessions in 3 minutes to even – to tie or take the lead in that game. So I did not include that one on there. For historic stake, absolutely, but it's not a game. It's not a back and forth game. It's not a game that's decided at the end. And while monumental, it didn't have to me enough of that other piece of it where the actual game was particularly exciting beyond just the excitement of the Jets winning. So I did not have that one on there.
All right. I didn't have 4 on there. I did put Super Bowl 5 on the list. And again, we're talking about era, but I mean, I know this game gets maligned because it was not a really well played game. And there was lots of, faux pas and fumbles in it, to coin a phrase, blunders and foul ups, if you will. But it was a game that was decided on the last play of the game on a field goal. So I do think that at least bears mentioning. It was the first Super Bowl that ended like that, and really one of the very few for 30 years that was that competitive.
So this is Super Bowl 5. This is 1970 season. This is the Colts 16, the Cowboys 13. And I want to do something that I did when we did the NBA Finals. I want to list the Hall of Famers. So the Hall of Famers for the Colts are Ted Hendricks, John Mackey, and Johnny Unitas. Cowboys Hall of Famers, Herb Adderley, former Packer, Mike Ditka, Cliff Harris, Bob Hayes, Chuck Howley, Bob Lilly, Mel Renfro, Roger Staubach, and Rayfield Wright. A lot of defensive Hall of Famers for the Dallas Cowboys. I also had this game on there. This is a very terribly played game. This is a 16-13 win by the Colts on a last-minute Jim O'Brien field goal to win the game for Baltimore. Johnny Unitas starts the game and gets injured halfway through, gets replaced by Earl Morrall, and sort of a flip side to Unitas replacing Morrall midway through the game or late in the game in Super Bowl III a couple years earlier. The only touchdown for the Colts is on a deflected pass that Unitas throws. It's deflected by a receiver and then falls into the hands of John Mackey, the Hall of Fame tight end. In those days, a guy could only catch a pass and advance the ball, or catch a pass at all, if the ball was tipped by a defender after it was tipped by his own player. So today that's just a catch, but in those days, Mackey could only catch it if it was tipped by his guy, then a Dallas guy, and then into his arms, which is what the referee ruled happening. Interestingly enough, the Colts, for all of Jim O'Brien's later field goal heroics, he actually misses the extra point. It gets blocked after that touchdown. Horrible game for the Colts. They give up 9 turnovers, which is the most by a Super Bowl winning team ever. I'd have to imagine it's one of the highest of any team in a Super Bowl, win or lose. And also that you'll never see a team in this day and age ever again turn the ball over 9 times and still win the Super Bowl. I had that one on there. It's interesting to note, though, that a lot of Colts players sort of.
Oh, yeah.
And when I interviewed Bill Curry, I asked him, I said, do you feel as if you were redeemed for Super Bowl III by the win a couple of years later in Super Bowl V? And he basically said, not really. He said, especially on offense, because we turned the ball over 9 times. And if you watch we've talked about this before, if you watch the America's game for that 70 Colts team, it's mostly about how winning in 70 really didn't mean anything because they had lost to Namath in 68.
Well, and it's funny too, because they went 11-2-1. It's not like they were a 8-6 team at the time. Like, they were still a really dominant team that year. Beat the Raiders in the championship game, beat the Cowboys in the Super Bowl. So, but you know what else with this game? And again, I'm not saying this would be the only reason, but you know what that Jim O'Brien kick is, and why it, I think, a special sort of thing in the NFL lore. It is the most popular and probably enduring image of a kick that is straight ahead.
Yeah. You mean
think about every other kick that's more famous was soccer style.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Again, I'm not saying that puts it. That's why it's on the list. By the way, I had a dream a few weeks ago that the Giants got a new kicker and he kicked straight ahead. I don't. It's a weird dream to have, but yeah. So anyway, I figured I would. So 5 should go on the list. I feel like, will it stand up to scrutiny later? Yeah, but it was a game decided on the last play, and like you mentioned, all the Hall of Famers and the first really good Super Bowl, first Super Bowl of the merger era.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's move that one along for further consideration on the best list. Interestingly enough, before we move onto this one, I looked, as we both do, I think, looked at some other lists just to make sure we were sort of on the right track, not missing anything. And a lot of lists had this as one of the worst Super Bowls of all time, which I don't know how you can call it.
Absurd.
Well, it's also like part of it to me is would have been fun to watch, and it feels like this game would have been fun to watch. Might not have been a fun game to watch in the regular season, but when the Super Bowl is like this, I think it would have been fun to watch. So
if the Super Bowl was like this year, people would love it.
Yeah, I agree. So, all right. So, where do you go next? What's chronologically, what do you have next for either a best or a worst?
I do think 6 might deserve to be up there on the worst. For a long time, they were the only team that didn't score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. The Dolphins in this game against the Cowboys in 71.
This is
I know.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is this end of the 71 season. This is the Cowboys beating the Dolphins 24-3. I know if you look at like the halftime score, it didn't really get out of hand until later, but I think it at least bears mentioning, the sort of an upstart team that was pretty much thoroughly outclassed in that game.
Yeah, I did not have this one on my list only because I thought there were a bunch that were worse for one reason or another. I think I also looked a little bit at the, like sort of like you said, it was a blowout, but not a horrible blowout. It was 10-3 at halftime. So at least going into the third quarter, people probably thought that this could still be a decent enough game. I want to find the yardage totals here because I feel like the yardage was close. They were close to even in first downs, 8 for Dallas versus 7 for Miami. Not a lot of passing, 100 net yards passing versus 105. Rushing, I think it was Dwayne Thomas had an incredible game. Yeah, Dwayne Thomas and Walt Garrison. Dwayne Thomas 19 for 95, Walt Garrison 14 for 74. So they ran the ball really well. Yeah, to me, again, this wasn't a terrible game, but it certainly wasn't a good one either. So I'll leave it to you. Do you want to? Let me just real quick, the Hall of Famers in this game for the Cowboys: Herb Adderley, Lance Allworth, Mike Ditka, Forrest Gregg, Cliff Harris, Bob Hayes, Chuck Howley, Bub Lilly, Mel Renfro, Roger Staubach, and Rayfield Wright. And for the Dolphins, Nick Bonaconte, Larry Zonka, Bob Greasy, Jim Langer, Larry Little, and Paul Warfield. I'll leave it to you if you want to move this one forward. To me, it's a blowout, but not an egregious blowout. But it's up to you. Do you want to move this one to future consideration on the worst list?
No, I don't think so. And to be honest, it had some novelty to it. It was the Cowboys first winning their first Super Bowl after, losing those NFL championship games to the Cowboys or the Packers rather. They've lost the year before to the Colts in the Super Bowl. The Dolphins, we know there was their first Super Bowl. We knew it would happen to them years later. Also notable because that was the game where when the Dolphins came out on the field, the fans were waving the towels. And later they were using them to dry their eyes and weep.
Andrew is going to repeatedly, at least for the first 22 Super Bowls, quote from the NFL Films Super Sunday video, which do you still have a copy of that?
No, but it's on YouTube.
It's on
YouTube.
Yeah. It's and
when we were kids that encompass. Well, it's also funny because they very clearly took a documentary on the first 5 or 6 Super Bowls or 7, and because the first 7 of them have talking heads, and then after that it's just the NFL Films videos. So they obviously just tacked on a later video to the first one.
And I think on YouTube you can find a version that goes through 21 and then a version that goes through 22. So they were clearly just updating these every year. But we used to get those from the video store once every couple weeks, I feel like.
And I don't know if I've told you this, but I realized it years later, the Super Bowl 21, the Giant one, the narration they used for that with the That's Steve Sable by then. That's not. Is it John Facenda? No.
Well, it's not John Facenda. John Facenda died in the early 80s. It's not Sable doing the narration, but it's whoever did it. Was it the guy who the Phillies announcer did a lot of that? What the heck was his name?
Oh, was it Harry Callis?
He did a lot of it. I don't know if he was that game. But
anyway, long story short, they come out and the Denver Broncos came to Super Bowl 21 hoping they would win. The New York Giants came in knowing they would. That's just it's Pat Summerall in the 86 Giants video, but it's just the same copy. They just took what Pat Summerall said in the 86 Giants video and had whoever that narrator was say it for the Super Bowl video.
Oh, jeez.
Anyway, moving rapidly along here or moving some kind of along. So 71, we won't move that one on. What's your next? Do you have anything next? Or, well, yeah, I would assume you have something next.
The next thing I had on either list was Super Bowl 10, Dallas and Pittsburgh. This is on the best list. This is the first meeting of these teams that would eventually meet 3 times in Super Bowls, including twice in the 70s. This is Steelers 21, Cowboys 17. Cowboys Hall of Famers Cliff Harris, Drew Pearson, Mel Renfro, Roger Staubach, Randy White, and Rayfield Wright. And Steelers Hall of Famers, a lot of Hall of Famers, Mel Blount, Terry Bradshaw, Joe Green, Jack Ham, Franco Harris, Jack Lambert, Donnie Shell, John Stallworth, Lynn Swann, and Mike Webster. This is 21-17. This is the Cowboys scoring down 20. Cowboys down 21-10 in the fourth quarter, and first their Pittsburgh's up 15-10. Then they get a touchdown from Lynn Swann. Then Dallas comes down and scores on a 34-yard touchdown reception by a guy named Percy Howard to make it 17-21. Misses the extra point, so now they need another touchdown rather than a field goal. Pittsburgh gets the ball back, runs 4 plays. They don't punt. They've been having kicking issues all day. They don't punt, and so the Steelers turn the ball over on downs. They end up with the ball at the Pittsburgh 39-yard line. Or no, hold on. I'm sorry, at the Dallas 39-yard line. So that they end up with the ball at their own 39-yard line. So they've got to go about 60 yards to score. They throw a couple of Staubach scrambles for 11, and then they complete a pass for 12 to Preston Pearson, who is actually a former Steeler. And then from the 38, they're just not really able to get in. But the Dallas has the ball down 4 in Pittsburgh territory with the ability to try and score. So this is a close game. It's the first game between sort of the 2 great powerhouses of the 70s in the NFL, Dallas and Pittsburgh. It is a memorable performance by Lynn Swann, who wins MVP with four receptions for 161 yards and a touchdown, including a famous catch that everybody has seen, even if you don't realize it's from this game, where Terry Bradshaw throws it downfield and Swann sort of dives and deflects the ball and then catches it sort of going to his knees. So for all of those reasons, historic win, second of 2 back-to-back for Pittsburgh. I had Super Bowl 10 as the next one on my list.
Yeah, and I think you have to put that one on there. You can momentarily think about it because we're going to have another one to talk about probably in a couple of minutes, and are 2 of those going to end up in the top 5, of basically the same teams. But I think you do have to put that one on there.
All right, so far on our list, we've got Super Bowl 5 and Super Bowl 10 on the best list, and we don't have anything on the potential worst list. I actually had an 8-year gap here before I got to another one I wanted to mention in either context, but I don't know if you might have something else. I basically have nothing else in the 70s.
So the next year I have 76, the Raiders and the Vikings. I think you have to, at this point, the Vikings have now been destroyed in 4 of the first 10 Super Bowls. It's a non-competitive game. It's never gets any closer than 19-7. It's 32-14 is the final, and that comes with a late touchdown by the Vikings. It's 32-7 by that point. we've seen now the Vikings get beaten by the Chiefs, the Dolphins, the Steelers, and now the Raiders. I have to at least put that in there. It's not the most lopsided final score, but again, it's almost half of the Super Bowls up to this point have featured the Vikings getting smacked around, and people had to be tired of it.
Super Bowl 11, Raiders 32, Vikings 14. Hall of Famers for the Raiders: Fred Biletnikoff, Cliff Branch, Willie Brown, Dave Casper, Ray Guy, Ted Hendricks, Art Shell, Ken Stabler, Gene Upshaw. For the Vikings, Carl Eller, Paul Krause, Alan Page, Fran Tarkenton, Mick Tingelhoff, and Ron Yeri. Yeah, this one didn't make my list either. I think I just didn't think it was quite bad enough. I don't know if I had a specific reason for this one. It wasn't like Super Bowl 6 where I thought it was a legitimately bad game, but some of the Dallas drama and that type of thing made it worthwhile. I just didn't think this one was quite bad enough, to be honest with you, but glad to move it along for further consideration if you'd like.
And now you don't have 13. You don't have the second Steelers Cowboys one from 78.
For a best?
Yes.
No, I actually did not. This was one where I think maybe because I'd had the previous one, and this is Super Bowl 13, Steelers 35, Cowboys 31. I think the reasons why I didn't have this one is because it was a 35-17 game with just under 7 minutes left, and the Dallas scores their last touchdown with 22 seconds left to make it 35-31. And I don't even know, did they try an onside kick here? Or no, they do try an onside kick. Rocky Blyer recovers it. Now, I don't know if he hadn't recovered it, what are you going to do with 20 seconds left with the Cowboys? So I think, and this is maybe where, if we were having this conversation 25 years ago, I probably would have at least flagged this one. But so many Super Bowls in the last 20 or so years have gone down to the very last possession where either team still had a chance to win and was within a score. To me, when the touchdown that makes it a one-score game is with less than 30 seconds left, probably a fun game, damn fun game to watch probably. And I didn't list the Hall of Famers for this one, but there were a lot of them, a lot of dramatic moments in this one. But I just can't get quite there because it was never really a one-score game late.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think I kind of flip 75 and 78 in my head and think this was the better game. I think 75, the game you described, is the game I was sort of flipping in my head to being 78. So I would tend to agree with you there that should be the one that's on the list. When was the next thing you had? You said we're done. Well, I mean, we're close to done with the 70s now anyway, but
my next one was Super Bowl 18, which was the 1983 season, I believe. Yeah, 1983 season.
And this would have been Raiders Redskins.
This would have been Raiders Redskins. So just we're through the 70s now. Did you have anything before that for either list?
No.
Okay, so we're through the 70s and we've got Super Bowl 5 and Super Bowl 10 on our potential best list, and we've got Super Bowl 11 on our potential worst list. Super Bowl 18 is the Raiders 38, the Redskins 9. The Redskins had won the Super Bowl the year before. They had beaten up on Miami in the previous year's Super Bowl. John Riggins had a crazy rushing day, and that was the first real NFL strike season. That was a 9-game season. This Redskins team is largely considered to be the best regular season Redskins team of that whole era, with a team that was in the Super Bowl 4 times, that was a perennial contender, put together by a Hall of Famer and recent Hello Old Sports in memoriam honoree Bobby Beathard. To me, this game, this is known best as the game where Marcus Allen was MVP and set the single game Super Bowl rushing record with 20 attempts and 191 yards. Just to list the Hall of Famers real quick. In addition to Allen, it's Cliff Branch, Ray Guy, Mike Haynes, Ted Hendricks, and Howie Long. And for the Redskins, it's Darryl Green, Russ Grimm, Art Monk, and John Riggins. But this is a game, it's a 29-point game. So in those days, that's a 5-score game. That's 4 touchdowns and something else. Washington scores in the third quarter to make it 21-9, and then the rest of the game is basically just Marcus Allen running all over them. It's 21-3 at halftime. It's never really all that close. Two interceptions for Washington. Washington actually has more passing yards in the game, but that's because number one, Marcus Allen is running the ball so well, and number two, they're playing from so far behind. So a game that just feels like it was never really close. There was never really anything to make it super exciting or close or noteworthy other than what Marcus Allen did. Now, maybe that's enough to make it so that it's not one of the sort of the all-time worst games, because maybe in the fourth quarter, if you're watching Marcus Allen break out these crazy long runs and you're wondering if he's going to get the record, maybe that's enough to make it not so boring as to be an all-time worst. But that was my first one that I had on the potential for the all-time worst list.
Yeah, and I think another reason that would be on the list is some of these other ones we mentioned, Raiders, Vikings, a couple we're going to mention in a minute. This was probably one of the ones that people expected to be a good game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Redskins had won the Super Bowl the year before. The Raiders had won the Super Bowl 3 years before that. Both teams had very good years, and this was, most people probably expected it to be a good game. I don't think the one we're going to talk about in 2 years, I don't think anyone expected that to be a good game. So I think that's another strike in this column, is that it didn't, there was expectations to it that weren't met either.
Yeah, I agree. So do we want to put that one on our potential worst list?
I think we should, yes.
All right. I did not have to go very far for my next potential, but why don't you tell me where you went next?
So I went to Super Bowl 20 in 1985. I went to you didn't. Is that where you went? You didn't do 19, or you did?
No,
do 19?
I went to 20. Bears 46, Patriots 10. Hall of Famers for the Patriots, just John Hanna and Andre Tippett. Bears, Jim Covert, Richard Dent, Dan Hampton, Walter Payton, and Mike Singletary. It is worth noting, and I don't know if this is the only Super Bowl you can say this about. It probably is. It's the only Super Bowl where both coaches are Hall of Famers as players, and that being Mike Ditka for the Bears and Raymond Berry for New England. But yeah, this was terrible. And why don't maybe talk a little bit about why you thought it was so terrible?
Yeah. So and this one is almost what we talked about at the beginning, where I was talking about novelty. And, this is very novel. The Bears won their first championship in 23 years. You had, right? The 63 would have been the last time, 22 years, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah. The Bears win for the first time in 22 years. You have Walter Payton. You have this all-time great single season team. You have Ditka. You have Buddy Ryan and the whole dichotomy there. It would have taken, had this game been 28-7, I probably would have been like, that is enough to overcome the lopsided final score. This game not only was over when it started, this game was over a week before that. You know what I mean? Like, this was, I know the Patriots were up 3-0, but other than that, the Bears, this was the Super Bowl, and it almost feels like when you watch Alabama beating Kent State on August 29th in the first game of the season, and you're like, they probably should get these guys off the field at this point. You know what I mean? It's the Super Bowl. So it's such a lopsided game that no matter what the other stories were, it has to go on the list for at least discussion.
Patriots had been basically a laughing stock since the NFL AFL merger. They'd been an okay team. I think they'd made a couple of AFL championship games in the early 60s, and they had one really good year in like 76, I want to say, where they made it. I don't know whether they were in I don't know if they were in the AFC Championship game that year, or maybe it was just the semifinals. But the round before that, they were 11-5 this year. They were only third in the AFC. They won 3 road games against the Jets, Raiders, and Dolphins to bring home the AFC Championship. And I think there are very few teams that have won 3 straight road games to go to the conference final or go to the Super Bowl. And obviously the 07 Giants are on that list also. It was rarer in those days, and it was particularly rare because the playoffs hadn't even had that many teams for all that long. They were just, they were a team. They had a decent defense. They had a couple of good wide receivers. Their best player by far is an offensive guard, John Hanna, who we mentioned as a Hall of Famer, is one of the greatest offensive linemen of all time. I am a strong advocate of the importance of good offensive line play, but when your best player is an offensive guard, you're probably not a Super Bowl team. The starting quarterback is Tony Eason. He's a young quarterback. He was part of that 84 draft with Marino and Jim Kelly and John Elway and some of those other guys. He is horrible in this game. He comes out with an 0-6, 0 for 6, 0 for his first 6 passes. I believe there's an interception in there also. This Patriots team just gets demolished. No interceptions for Eason. His successor, Steve Grogan, throws 2 interceptions. Eason gets benched. Steve Grogan goes in the game.
A guy got benched in the Super Bowl, by the way.
After 6 passes. I think that was the famous story where John Hanna went to the sideline and said to the coaching staff, "You can leave this guy in, but if you do, I'm not going to block for him." Yeah, really, really early to pull your quarterback in a Super Bowl. I don't know if that's ever happened before, at least, or since that I can think of. Patriots turn it over 6 times. They're just, the Bears offense is really, it's led by Walter Payton, but, Jim McMahon is by no means an all-time great quarterback. This is really just the Bears defense just demolishing the Patriots in this game. Patriots with 7 net rushing yards, and where's their passing here? 116 net passing yards. So that's not quite as bad. But the Bears just run over them in every sort of way, shape, or form. And it's just, you're right. And it's funny. I think when you watch this game, you watch highlights of it, or, during right around now, a lot of times, when NFL Network reruns old Super Bowls, they'll show this game. And I think the combination of the fact that it's inside, it's the Patriots in those red jerseys, which I know they've worn them as a throwback from time to time, but, they're associated with sort of the terrible years of the Patriots. It's the Bears' only Super Bowl. When I watch it, I have this sense that I'm not really watching a Super Bowl.
Well, and this game is so weird because this game is so bad for the Patriots that it gets thrown into all those montages of terrible Patriots teams pre-Bill Parcells, really, but really pre-Bill Belichick. It's like they were in the Super Bowl, but it gets thrown into like they were so bad. Look at this clip, and it's always I don't know if it was Eason or Grogan, but kind of like turtled over in the end zone after he gets hit by somebody. It's like, yeah, it's so bad that it was almost embarrassing for them that they were in the Super Bowl and got beat that badly.
I think I've told this story before, but when I was growing up in elementary school, the dictionaries in the classroom, there were these big green dictionaries. The definition of the word dejected was a picture of a Patriot. I think it was Tony Eason with his head in his hands, possibly from that Super Bowl. So they defined dejection in the 1980s.
So that goes on the list and might find its way onto the final list. I went forward as much as I'd like to put 86 on there. I really can't. Of the 5 Super Bowls the Giants were in, that's the one that merits the least discussion for being on one of these lists.
Mm-hmm.
Honorable mention, though, for at one point, I think it was Harry Carson got a personal foul, and then Lawrence Taylor picked up the flag and threw it. So they got a second personal foul.
Yeah, and they both are enforced. Yeah, I remember the referee said throwing the marker.
And when I was a kid,
for throwing the marker.
Somehow we got a hold of these VHSs. I think one of your friends' dad had it.
Yeah.
And we were watching the recorded version of it. And when he said throwing the marker, I was a kid. I knew football, but I'd never heard of that phrase. I thought that he picked up the first down marker and threw it down the field like a javelin.
I think that's actually
the camera doesn't show what he did. So
I think that's actually what I thought too. Although I don't know if I thought that he like threw it down like a javelin, but more that like he just like took it and like flung it. But yeah. So anyway,
all right. So I go forward to 88. The 49ers and the Bengals, and the famous sort of crowning achievement of Joe Montana's career, the famous Super Bowl drive, the John Candy drive, if you will. Culminating in the touchdown to John Taylor, and that would have been Super Bowl 23.
Yep, 49ers 20, Bengals 16. Really, the only the first 49ers Bengals Super Bowl is it's a close game, but it's not like this. The only Hall of Famer for the Bengals in this game is Anthony Munoz, the great offensive tackle. Niners got Charles Haley, Ronnie Lott, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, and also Steve Young, who's Montana's backup. Bengals lead the game late. They kick a field goal with 3:20 left in the fourth quarter to break a 13-13 tie. Kick it off to the 49ers, who I haven't seen this play. I'm sure I've seen it before. Somehow the 49ers get the ball on their own 8-yard line, which is rare for a kickoff these days, because you'd think usually they must have been like almost a perfect kickoff, because he probably fielded it.
I think it might have been mishandled. I'll look this up. Well, you know what, though? I may be thinking of the 86 AFC Championship game, the Montana or the Elway drive. I'll look it up, but one of those two games, it was like the kick was mishandled. But let me see if I can find it.
Oh, here it is. The Niners returned it to their own 15, which is still, kind of deep. And then there was an illegal block. So it's half the distance, and they get it at the 8. And I'm assuming that the guy who returned that kick might have been John Taylor, the same receiver who later caught the winning touchdown pass. So this is the definitive Joe Montana drive, 92 yards. Ironically, this is the one Super Bowl of the 4 that Montana does not win MVP. Jerry Rice actually wins MVP of this Super Bowl, and deservedly so. 11 receptions for 215 yards and a touchdown. So hard to quibble with a guy with 215 yards, but nonetheless, you just kind of think to yourself, it's Montana's shining moment, but it's the only Super Bowl that he's not the MVP of. This is a good game. It's a close game. It's won on a last-minute drive that, had they not scored, they would not have won the game. They were down 3, so they needed at least a field goal there. It wasn't like they were driving from a tie where they in some sense had nothing to lose. And it's the signature moment of maybe the greatest clutch quarterback, or one of the 2 or 3 greatest clutch quarterbacks of all time. It's probably up there with a couple of with the one Elway drive and the 58 Unitas drive, the Ice Bowl, the Star. That could be a good episode one time, is just do the greatest drives in NFL history. But nonetheless, this is one of the greatest 4 or 5 drives in NFL history. So I think it's up there. I think it's a strong candidate to be up there, and it probably deserves to be on our list for further consideration.
Absolutely. And by the way, one of those greatest drives we'll be talking about in a little while as well. Another one that would be on that list. But yeah, so the game, it's never more than a 7-point game. They trade field goals. It's tied at 3. It's tied at 6. The Bengals take a 13-6 lead. The Niners tie it. The 49ers actually they were ahead 3-0 in this game, and then at the end at 20-16. So I certainly think that one goes on the list and may very well end up being discussed down the line.
All right. Where did you have something next?
I did put the 49ers and the Broncos on there. It's another one with the margin of victory is 45 points. The 49ers 55, the Bengals 10. It's now the third time in 4 years we've seen the Bengals, or not the Bengals, the Broncos. If I keep saying Bengals, I mean Broncos. It's now the third time in 4 years we've seen the Broncos get one degree or another dominated in the Super Bowl. This time, obviously, being the worst one. It was never a game. It was, I think, 13-3 at the most tight that it was. It was, at no point did the 49ers, was the game in any kind of jeopardy at all. So I do have, I guess it was 7-3, excuse me. I do have that one on the list. Elway throws 2 interceptions. He sacked 4 times. He has 108 yards of offense, or he has 108 yards passing. It doesn't look like they broke 150 yards of offense in this game, from what I can tell. So, yes, I put this game on the list of worst.
Total yardage for Denver in this game, 167, and then 461 for San Francisco. Hall of Famers for the Niners are the same. Hall of Famers for Denver are just Elway and Steve Atwater. Montana, 5 touchdowns, 297 yards passing. Steve Young gets in the game a little bit. Elway, 108 yards for no touchdowns and no TDs and 2 interceptions. I think the Niners really kind of spread it around here. Yeah, Rice gets a touchdown. Five different guys get touchdowns here. 3 for Rice, but then John Taylor with a touchdown reception, Brent Jones with a touchdown reception, Tom Rathman and Roger Craig, the 2 running backs, both get runs for touchdowns. This is, and I know we're a year off, but also I think it's worth noting for yours and my purposes, this is the Tecmo Super Bowl 49ers team.
Yeah, it really is, because everybody who's on this team is on the Tecmo team. That's significant, right?
Craig and Rathman in the backfield, Taylor and Rice, Brent Jones, Haley and Romanowski.
Young is Montana's backup. Yeah, it's the Tecmo Super Bowl team. You're right. And probably, well, some people say 84, but 84 and 89 are considered the 2 best 49er teams of that era. So, yeah, I think definitely sort of their crown jewel in terms of dominance, if not drama.
Yeah, and I have no problem moving this one along for further conversation. I didn't necessarily have this one super high up, and I'll explain my justification for that when we get to it. But the score is enough to maybe move it up just a little further. So, and I think we probably don't have to go much further to get to a best.
Now, Super Bowl 25, and I'll dare anybody to accuse us of homerism. The Giants and the Bills, a Super Bowl that is, there's so much there. For me, watching the history of the Giants DVD, or not the history of the Giants, the 1990 video yearbook, and again, the Tecmo Super Bowl Giants and the Tecmo Super Bowl Bills, all of that, fine. And to be honest, the Gulf War backdrop of it, fine. The fact of the matter is, this was the first Super Bowl and one of the very few, to my knowledge, that came down to, yes, technically it was the second to last play of the game, but really the last play of the game, where if Scott Norwood makes the field goal, the Bills win the Super Bowl. If Scott Norwood misses the field goal, the Giants win the Super Bowl. There was no tie at play. There was no overtime at play. That was the end of the game. There were obviously all sorts of Hall of Famers. There were not as many as in some of these 70s teams you mentioned, really. I mean, only Giants Hall of Famer.
Only Giants
LT.
Hall of Famer on the field is LT. The owner, GM, and head coach are all Hall of Famers, but LT is the only player that's a Hall of Famer. The Bills got Jim Kelly, James Lofton, Andre Reed, Bruce Smith, and Thurman Thomas.
There's the back and forth of the, Hostetler is the backup quarterback. The Bills get up 12-3 early. The Giants have a long drive before the half to cut it to 2. They have a really long drive after the half to go up 17-12. The Bills come back over top of them. The Giants have a drive. It's back and forth the whole way. Both teams feel like they're executing their game plan. This is sort of not the earliest, but like this is Bill Belichick's, the birth of sort of the mythology of the mastermind with the game plan he came up this. That was the other thing. The Bills and what was now called the K gun. Back then, everybody called it the hurry up offense, the sort of no huddle, get to the line quick offense that was, sort of revolutionizing football at the time, or so they thought. And, in the end, it's the missed field goal. It's the Giants with the Super Bowl. It ends up being Bill Parcells' last game as head coach of the Giants. And just the drama, the back and forth play. It's a very cleanly played game. I think this has to be, considered one of the best Super Bowls of all time.
Yeah, there really is. And there's so many things. You mentioned the Gulf War backdrop. It's Parcells' last game. Historical significance, I think, matters too, in that if the Bills win that game, whatever happens next, they're not the Bills of those 90s teams. I mean, I have emails from 2 years ago, with friends or, whatever guys I know from playing cards. And it's like, yeah, I can't make it to cards this week because I got to go to my daughter's soccer game. And they're like the Buffalo Bills of, 15-year-old girls soccer. They've been in the championship game every year for the last whatever, and they've lost. Like, if Scott Norwood makes that kick, they don't enter that lexicon of a team that just, makes it to the precipice and loses every year. And that's just so unprecedented. There's nothing like that in sports, in any sport. Maybe a little bit with the Lakers in the 60s with Boston, but that wasn't all those years in a row. Plus, it was different. There were so many fewer teams. There's that part of it. There's the fact that the Giants have this amazing game plan really on both offense and defense. The Giants run an offense with 3 tight ends for most of the game in an effort to just bleed as much of the clock as the humanly possible. Incidentally, Andrew and I, one of our earlier episodes we did was on this Super Bowl. So check that out. I think it's probably like episode 12 or something. It wasn't one of our very first, but it was one of the first we did over the first few months, all about Super Bowl 25. So check that out. So yeah, it's got to be on there for so many reasons.
And again, we could talk about this at a different time, but if you talked about from the Bills standpoint, if Norwood makes that kick and the Giants lose, and by the way, the Giants, everything up to that point is the same game. You know what I mean? Whether Norwood made or missed the kick really had very little to do with the Giants on that play. Belichick's gone. Belichick had already agreed to leave for Cleveland. Does Parcells leave?
Maybe not. Maybe not.
If Parcells stays, Parcells probably goes right back to Sims. Do the 90s Giants have a little more juice left in them? How does that impact the early 90s Cowboy team, who I think was coming no matter what, to be honest? But, all of these are interesting things. So, you can obviously spider web it out to ridiculous proportions, but
yeah, and maybe that's what I'm about to do here. But if you want to get silly, if Parcells stays with the Giants even another year, he probably doesn't go to New England. He probably doesn't bring Belichick to New England in 97, or 96 rather. We're getting a little bit far afield here now, but a lot happened in that. That is like, you could probably do a 5-part documentary series just on everybody that was involved in that game and what it meant, going forward.
Good uplifting moment for a nation reeling from the week before when Iraqi turncoat Sergeant Slaughter had won the World Wrestling Federation Championship.
Let's move on here. Where did you go next? Because we got some stinkers here, and maybe that's where you're headed next.
I went to 93, and I know what people are going to say about, 92 was 52-17. 93 is the worst game. 93 is the worst game because it's a rematch of the year before. It's the exact same Super Bowl. 92 has at least the angle of, it's the Cowboys. The Cowboys are back. It's been 15 years since the Cowboys have won a Super Bowl. It's been 13 years or whatever since the Cowboys were in a Super Bowl. It's Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson and all this stuff that, again, makes you want to vomit, but at least it's interesting. the next year, and I know the Bills were up at halftime, that the 10-9 or whatever it was. The Bills had a small lead at halftime. By the middle of the third quarter, we were back to the same crap that at this point we had seen the year before. We had seen the year before that, really, except it was against the Redskins. It was like, to me, that is the less interesting game. So I think 93 is worse.
So Dallas plays Buffalo in both Super Bowls. Dallas wins the first one, Super Bowl 27. They win 52-17. They win Super Bowl 28, 30-13. They're actually Buffalo's ahead by a touchdown, 13-6 at halftime of that second game. The Hall of Famers, and I think it's probably the same both years. Buffalo, it's Jim Kelly, James Lofton, Andre Reed, Bruce Smith, Thurman Thomas, same as a couple years previous. Cowboys got Aikman, Charles Haley, Michael Irvin, and Emmitt Smith. One of the interesting things about those 2 years is it really kind of feels like almost like the same game. Now, they're obviously played in different places. The first one is in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl, which I think is the last ever Super Bowl at the Rose Bowl. The following years in the Georgia Dome. One of the interesting things about this is, and this is something you'll probably never see, and I read this years ago and I'd forgotten about it, and I was just reading about it again now. Right before Super Bowl, I think it would have been the Giants Bills Super Bowl, or going into it, the three networks, CBS, NBC, and ABC, each got a Super Bowl. 21 with the Giants was ABC, 22 with the Redskins was CBS, NBC got Super Bowl 27. And then the three networks put in some sort of it was like a closed bid, or it might have had something to do with the Olympics, or I don't even know. But anyway, that extra Super Bowl, so 2 years in a row, it was on NBC. It was the same broadcast team, Dick Enberg and O.J. Simpson and some other guys. And so it was literally the same two teams. It was the same network, the same broadcasters. And that year, both the Niners and the Chiefs were in the NFC and AFC championship games, and that would have been Young in Montana. So everybody was all excited to think, okay, are we going to get a 49ers Chiefs Super Bowl with Steve Young going up against Joe Montana? That would have been one of the biggest and most anticipated games in the history of sports. And then not only do we not get it, but you get the Cowboys and the Bills for the second year. And I remember listening to some, I think it was like the oldies radio station growing up. And, these guys obviously weren't really sports guys. But I remember one of the DJs saying to the other ones, do you want to just go bowling on Super Bowl Sunday? It was like in the air that if Buffalo ends up back in the Super Bowl, especially against Dallas, nobody's going to care. Now, I don't know if I can go with you to call a game that was 13-6 at halftime with Buffalo leading. I don't know if I can go and call that one of the worst games of all time. I had the previous year where it was 52-17. Jim Kelly gets knocked out of the game. The Bills turn it over however many times they turned it over. I had that game, not the following year, but I can understand where you're coming from with that one.
I'll go with you on 92 because we can't put both in there. If you told me right now I have to watch one of those games, I would watch the first one.
And this is where it gets interesting because now we're in the point where we remember these games.
I was going to say, this is really the line where now we remember them.
And it's not like a World Series or an NBA Finals where you probably didn't watch every minute of every game. I watched basically all of these games except for, one where I think I had a CYO basketball game and one a few years ago where I, left the party at halftime and was still on the Metro as the third quarter was starting. The vast majority of these games, I sat down and watched beginning to end. So it's a question of you do kind of think back, did I enjoy watching the games and why was that? Did I perceive it as being closer than it was? And I think sort of, like you said, was I wrong that time to think that Buffalo had a chance when they were up 7 at halftime? So there is a little bit of sort of your memory starts to creep in a little bit here.
Yeah, and I remember at this point which Super Bowl, where I was for every one of these Super Bowls, to the point that I know which one you had a CYO basketball game.
Mm-hmm.
because I was at home with my friends and you were at a CYO basketball game. So where do you go next after 90? We covered 92 and 93. Where do you go next?
So
because I have a bit of a jump here.
So I did not have, and this maybe gets right to the point we were just making. I do not have Super Bowl 29 when the 49ers smacked the heck out of the Chargers the following year. I don't have that. That was not a close game. I think just the sheer offensive dominance of that 49er team, scoring on long touchdown passes to Jerry Rice and Ricky Waters and all of that type of thing. To me, that in and of itself was just sort of fun to watch. So I didn't put that on the list.
I didn't either. And that may be, again, a little bit of bias is strong, but like we just talked about the first two Super Bowls we remember were 92 and 93. We were Giant fans. We did not like the Cowboys. Mm-hmm. This was the first Super Bowl I remember that the Cowboys didn't win. So I remember enjoying this quite a bit. And I liked the 49ers back then too, the Steve Young 49ers. But there was a story to it, the whole thing of, and also, to be honest, and I don't mean this in a funny way, but this can't be overstated, it was somebody besides the Bills getting their butt kicked. So that was neat. That was new too.
Yeah, and that was definitely a team that you never really saw back anywhere. The Chargers team, incidentally, the Chargers team that was also put together by Bobby Beathard. So I did have 31, the 97 season, Broncos 31, Green Bay Packers 24. Elway wins his first Super Bowl. It's the first Super Bowl that the AFC has won in 14 years. They take a final lead. They go up 31-24 on a 1-yard touchdown run by Terrell Davis, who has 3 touchdowns on the day. He actually plays through a part of the game. He plays with a migraine, wins MVP, has a monster day. Terrell Davis does 30 carries, 157 yards, 3 touchdowns. I actually think that if it's not for this game, Terrell Davis might not be in the Hall of Fame because the guy only plays like 6 years. And part of what gets him in is that period of dominance he had for a couple of years in the late 90s. And this Super Bowl is a big part of that. So Elway's first for the AFC, a game that's tied number of times throughout the 4 quarters. I had Super Bowl 32. I'm sorry. Packers 24, Broncos 31, Packers Hall of Famers Leroy Butler, Brett Favre, Reggie White, Broncos Steve Atwater, Terrell Davis, John Elway, Shannon Sharp, and Gary Zimmerman. That's where I went with it.
Yeah, me too. When you said 31, I started looking. I'm like, this was not as close of a game as people seem to have remembered, but you were talking about 32, and I agree. A couple of things happened in this game. One, the AFC curse got broken. B, John Elway. I mean, he was on those Bronco teams that were responsible for 3 of those lopsided scores in the late 80s to the Giants, Redskins, and 49ers. So, like you said, and also, to be honest, at the time, it looked like, okay, we had the 49ers thing in the 80s. We had the Cowboys thing in the early 90s. Now we're going to have the Packers thing. The Packers won in 96. They're going to win in 97. Not a lot of people saw this coming with this Bronco team. It was a good Bronco team, but they didn't even have a bye. They were 12-4. I'm guessing who would have had the byes in 97? Probably Pittsburgh and Buffalo. I just see they played 20 games, so I'll look it up. But I'm guessing those would have been the teams. But this was a very big surprise. It was also a very good game. I don't think there was any teams anybody was tired of in them yet. Yeah, Denver was actually the number 4 seed. Denver didn't even win their division. Kansas City was the number 1 seed, and Pittsburgh was the number 2 seed. Mm-hmm. So Denver actually had to go on the road twice to win, and they were close games both times. They beat Kansas City by 4, they beat Pittsburgh by 3, and then they went to the Super Bowl. So, yeah, I think that game definitely belongs on the list, 97, Super Bowl 32.
So I don't know that I want to spend a ton of time on this next one because I did have it, but I don't think it probably reaches the list of of all-time worst. I had the following year, the Broncos Falcons as a possible worst. And again, maybe this is part of memory, and that I remember watching this game and just thinking it was really boring. The Broncos were up 31-6 in the fourth quarter, and then they get a couple of touchdowns late to make it a more respectable 34-19. So this is a game that I think was worse than the score. Incidentally, the only Hall of Famer in that game is for the Falcons is their kicker, Morton Anderson. And the coin toss is actually done by members of the Colts and the Giants from 40 years earlier, from the greatest game ever played. Guys like Barry and Moore, Gino Marchetti, Frank Gifford, Roosevelt Brown. So that was interesting. I don't remember those guys doing the coin toss. Anyway, probably shouldn't be moved on to like sort of the potential all-time worst, but I just remember being bored to tears by that game, and it was not nearly as close as the score would lead you to believe.
I hate this game. I think you're right. We can't advance it, but I've always hated this game. I remember in 7th grade, the next day, people being like, well, that game sucked. Like, it wasn't exciting. It wasn't a blowout in like a fun way where somebody scored 50 points or whatever.
And I think
the thing I remember most about it was that the Falcon guy, Eugene Robinson, I think, who didn't he win like Man of the Year the night before, and he got caught picking up a prostitute?
Yes.
I better be right about that. I'm going to get sued.
No, you're right. You're right. You're right. The other thing...
Well, you'll get sued. You're the executive producer. But...
The other thing I remember about this game, and I know I've brought this up before.
I know where you're going with this.
The halftime show.
Yes.
So the halftime show, this is during the period where for about a year and a half, I think you'd have to kind of have been a teenager in the 90s to remember this. Ska music was a big deal sort of in the 90s, around this time. Like, I still love the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones and, Real Big Fish and some of those. But then as sort of an offshoot of that, there was actually like a resurgence of swing music. And it was some of these bands, the Squirrel Nut Zippers had that song Hell, which is actually a really good song. And there was this other band called Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. And the halftime show was Stevie Wonder, Gloria Estefan, and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. And just having to listen to, and their big song was called You and Me and the Bottle Makes Three. And there was, which I don't know if I've heard that song in probably 25 years, but Pat Summerall had to read the promo for the halftime show 3 million times throughout the day and probably the week before in the NFC Championship game. And just the way he clearly didn't know what he was reading and just have to kept saying, and Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, just over and over again. It's one of those things I'll just never forget. I also wonder if the Falcons had a little bit of what the Patriots had, in the mid 80s with this, was just the fact that they never made it there before and would never make it there since in this iteration. The game was in a dome. I don't know. To me, dome Super Bowls that are not good games feel very just sort of sterile and boring and sort of devoid of time and place. So I think it was sort of a combination of those things just made this feel like just a boring Super Bowl.
And we were at the era at this point where the Super Bowl was only in like 4 places because they had stopped doing it in non-NFL stadiums.
And although I should correct myself, this isn't a dome. This is in Miami. So
oh, okay. Yeah. So it was basically back then it was in Miami, San Diego, and they got rid of that pretty soon after that, New Orleans and Atlanta. I'm pretty sure they never did it at Texas Stadium. Houston wasn't at the Astrodome ever. They did it in Minnesota once and decided not to go back. Like, it was pretty much in like 4 places at this point. By the way, that Rose Bowl game in 92 with the Cowboys and the Bills, the last one in a non-NFL stadium, was only in the Rose Bowl because it was supposed to be in Arizona, and they moved it because they didn't recognize Martin Luther King Day.
Oh, that's right. I knew that was one of those around. I didn't know which one it was.
So, yeah, I don't think it goes on, but I did want to pause and say that this game sucked.
Yeah, I agree. Where next?
Especially with how good the NFC Championship game was the week before.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. The missed
or
field
2 weeks before, whatever it was.
missed field goal by Gary Anderson. No, I was going to say, I think that the following year, Super Bowl 34, when we're kind of in a place where we're getting a lot of back-to-back-to-back years here.
It's going to continue for a while.
We're more than halfway through the Super Bowls by far, but we're not halfway through the list. So,
yeah,
you all will know how long this is going to be, but we don't. So anyway, I did have Super Bowl 34, the Rams 23, the Titans 16. Just real quick, Hall of Famers. Only Bruce Matthews for the Titans, the great offensive lineman, and then 4 on offense for the Rams: Isaac Bruce, Marshall Faulk, Kurt Warner, and Orlando Pace, the offensive tackle. I have this on the list. This is the famous game where Kevin Dyson for the Titans stretches out at the very last minute in the very last game to try and reach the end zone and comes up just short. Who is it that tackles him? I believe it's London Fletcher, right? Oh, no, Mike Jones. Mike Jones, the linebacker, Mike Jones for the Rams. Yeah, London Fletcher was on the team, but not him. So that game would have either been a tie, it would have been the first game to go to overtime, or I guess the Titans could have gone for two, but that
Jeff Fisher wasn't doing that in 1998.
Jeff Fisher wasn't doing that in 1999. Yeah. Still the only the only championship ever won by the St. Louis Rams. They won it in LA, 20 some odd years later. I remember when I watched this game saying afterwards that I think that might be the greatest Super Bowl in history. I think in some ways it's sort of gone down a little bit in my eyes because it was one of those things where it was like Rams up big, 16-0, Titans come back.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily like a classic back and forth game. Wasn't a tremendous upset. Kurt Warner was a huge story. That was his first year as a starter. Trent Green had gotten hurt and he had come in and the whole thing, he'd been bagging groceries and all that stuff. So I don't know if this is maybe necessarily like a top 2 or 3, but it's one of the all-time great, or at least very, very good Super Bowls.
We do have to move it on. I think it just occurred to me why one of the reasons this game has never fully resonated with me. And again, look, I come to this from a perspective, I always kind of said, it was two teams who hadn't really been there before. So there weren't a lot of like villains. I know a lot of people, Kurt Warner's story had kind of captivated people that year, but it wasn't like one team was, had won a bunch of years in a row or anything like that. And I just kind of put this together now. Both of these teams had only been in their respective cities like 4 years at this point too. So
yeah, this might have been the Titans' first year in Nashville.
I think it was their first year as the Titans. It wasn't their first year in Tennessee.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they'd been the Tennessee Oilers for those 2 years previously, playing in Memphis on the complete other side of the state. Yeah, and I think this was only the second year in St. Louis for the Rams. I want to say maybe a little more than that, but
no, I think 96 was their third or fourth.
So they've been there a little year longer. Yeah, okay.
So I mean, if we're gonna nitpick down the line, I feel like that hurts it from a sort of narrative standpoint. But a game that comes down to the last play, almost goes to overtime, you have to advance it to the next round.
Agreed. Do we want to go a year forward and maybe back into the next column?
Yeah, we do have to put this on here. This is I honestly consider this the last, there's 2 eras we're going to discuss, and this is sort of the last game of that era. Giants, Ravens. Ravens 34, Giants 7. The Ravens, even though the Giants had a better, they were both at the same record that year, but the Giants were the 1 seed. The Ravens were like a 4 seed or whatever they were. This game was over very, very quickly, let's say. The Ravens had 10 points a minute into the second quarter. It became very clear the Giants could have played for 9 quarters and not gotten 10 points. The brief glimmer of hope was when Ron Dixon scored a touchdown to make it 17-7, and then on the next play, the Ravens scored a touchdown and made it 24-7, and it was obviously over from there.
The one thing I will say is there is another brief glimmer of hope in the second quarter when Jesse Armstead picks off the pass from Trent Dilfer, runs it back for a touchdown, would have tied the game at 7 and then gets called back on a defensive holding. You have always been strongly believed that made no difference in the game and it would have been just as much of a blowout. I think you're probably right, but that was another glimmer of hope early when they almost tied it. It's also worth noting, and I think this is one of the things that makes it such a terrible Super Bowl, is that the touchdown the Giants score and the touchdown the Giants almost score, neither one of those were scored by their offense.
No, and the Giants offense didn't approach scoring. Kerry Collins was 15 of 39 for 112 yards, 4 interceptions. He was also sacked 4 times. The leading rusher in the game was Tiki Barber, who managed 49 yards on 11 carries. The Giants just thoroughly, and then on top of that, the Ravens offense, which had gone like 6 games without scoring a touchdown. Also, Brandon Stokely was torching Jason Sehorn all game the week after Jason Sehorn had shut down Randy Moss, and suddenly now Brandon Stokely is toasting him. Future Giant Super Bowl champion Brandon Stokely, by the way.
What?
He was on the 11 team. He got hurt in like week 2.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I have no recollection of that.
So anyway,
Kerry Collins quarterback rating for that game, 7.1.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because you thought the Giants had a chance. This wasn't like some of these other games where it was like, oh, they're just clearly outmatched. If you had to rank the 4 units, the 2 defenses were the best. Ravens defense first, and the Giants defense, although the Ravens defense was, head and shoulders above the Giants defense. But the Giants offense was leaps and bounds over the Ravens offense. They had just scored 41 points in an NFC conference championship game. It wasn't like the Giants were like, oh, they got this offense and who knows what they're going to, they were seen as sort of peaking at just the right time.
Yeah, this wasn't a Bears, Patriots, or 49ers, Chargers mismatch going in. It has to go on the list for worst.
And I think that a lot of ways that that Ravens defense kind of made their reputation in this game. They were known as a very good defense, but I don't think, and again, I was sort of conscious of football for one and not for the other, but I don't think they came in being known as like this crazy dominant defense the way the Bears did in 85, even though they're now sort of put on that level. Mm-hmm. I think this Super Bowl had a lot to do with that. Whereas if the Bears had won Super Bowl 20 by a score of, 14-7 or, 24-21, I think that 85 Bears defense would still have the same reputation.
I agree with that. And for the record at this point, I have one more on my list for worst Super Bowls.
I have 2.
Okay. So we are now going to turn the page and head into what I call the Patriot era. And not that every game involves the Patriots, but that most games do. And most of the ones we're going to discuss do.
All right. So, so Super Bowl 36, 2001 season. This begins I don't know what they call it, the Patriots era or the Belichick era, but this is Super Bowl 36. This is the first Super Bowl that's ever played in February, and that's because of the September 11th attacks that pushed the game back a week. It's in Louisiana at the Superdome. Rams have the same Hall of Famers, although they've added Aeneas Williams, the safety who had previously been with the Phoenix Cardinals. Patriots only two Hall of Famers, both on defense, Ty Law and Richard Seymour, although obviously Tom Brady will be there one day. So I have my own thoughts, but what stands out to you about this Super Bowl?
So a couple of things. One, the Rams had become hateable in 2 years. I can't describe why or how, but like in 99, everybody was like, oh yeah, it's cool. By 01, and I think it was because of Vermeil going and Martz coming in, and Mike Martz was just a hateable guy in terms of his persona. I don't know what he was like in his personal life, but like he was a guy it was easy to feel a certain way about as a football coach. Which ironically, the other guy became a much bigger embodiment of that later on. But the Rams were seen as like this unstoppable force. They'd won in 99. In 2000, Warner was hurt most of the year. I think the thought was, had he been healthy, they might have won again. Who knows? But that was sort of the going wisdom. The Patriots.
I remember as a Giant fan just thinking that if they had to play the Rams, it would not have been pretty.
And they would have had to play the Rams had the Rams won in the wild card round. They lost to the Saints. So in 01, then you had the Patriots, who it's hard to put yourself back in that time. And certainly it's a larger discussion from sort of a cultural standpoint. But just in the context of this, the fact that they were called the Patriots and they wore red, white, and blue was a big deal to a lot of people. It seems almost silly now, and it probably was, but that was considered a big deal. Plus, it was, the whole Brady story, which has been seared into everybody's memory now, was kind of it was obviously new. It was that year. Bledsoe had gotten hurt early in the year. Brady comes in, they start winning. Bledsoe's ready to come back. Belichick sticks with Brady. Actually, in the AFC Championship game, Brady did get hurt, and Bledsoe played most of that game over the Steelers. And for like half a minute, there was a discussion of, are they going to go back to Bledsoe? And Belichick quickly put that to bed, I think, by Tuesday of the Super Bowl week, because there was no week off that year. Put to bed that there was going to be, that Brady was going to start. But all of this was sort of new and different at this point. And then it turns into a great game.
So a few things. First of all, once in a while, you'll hear people say that the reason this Super Bowl didn't have a bye week was because of 9/11. That's not true. They moved it back a week because of 9/11. It was never supposed to have a bye week. There was a period, I think the following year was the same way, where they had, for whatever reason, they'd gotten rid of the bye week again and weren't doing it. And I don't like the bye week, but that Super Bowl did not lose its bye week because of 9/11.
They were doing this weird dance for a few years where they didn't want to start on Labor Day, but they had it in their minds that the Super Bowl needed to be played in January. So they would kind of back and forth. Like I remember in 97, they had this first week of the season was Labor Day weekend. And then the next year, so they were kind of going through that dance. What this did this year was they realized, we can just play the Super Bowl on February 4th or 3rd or whatever, and who cares? That's what this Super Bowl did. But yeah, it was never, because if there had been a bye week, they would have just canceled the bye week. They had to push everything back.
It's kind of makes you a little bit of a nostalgic for the time when the NFL tried to live within some sort of a boundary. Like they didn't just want to be a 12-month-a-year sport, games every day of the week, all that type of thing. So it does make me think of that too. Just a couple things. First of all, nobody knew that Brady was going to be, not just that he wasn't going to be Brady, but that he was going to be anything. I mean, he was a guy who'd been a backup quarterback. He'd been fourth or fifth on the depth chart going into that season or going into the previous season. He'd been drafted, whatever late round it was that he was drafted in. What was he drafted?
Sixth round.
199th he was drafted, I think.
I think that's what he was drafted. Yeah.
Shout out to George Bozica, our Sports History Network colleague in the Professional Football Researchers Association, because a couple years ago at the convention in Canton, I actually saw Tom Brady's draft card, which I thought was pretty cool. This is a bad team offensively, even compared to a couple of years later. Deion Branch, who would win the MVP of their Super Bowl victory over the Eagles a couple of years later, is not on the team yet. They obviously don't have any of the guys that would be a part of the later dynasty, the Edelmans, the Gronkowskis. All those guys are, they're in junior high school at this point. You're talking about a team whose leading receiver is Troy Brown, who's kind of a journeyman, a good player, but sort of a journeyman. David Patton, fourth in receiving yards on the team is Terry Glenn. with 204 yards. Terry Glenn, who only plays in 4 games for the team the whole season, and who it does not play in the postseason. I think he probably gets injured at some point during the season. It's his last year with the Patriots. So this is not a good team. The leading rusher on the team is Antoine Smith. This is before they bring in Corey Dillon or any of those guys. Second leading rusher is Kevin Falk with only 169 yards. So they really only have one good running back and like one good receiver, maybe 1.5. This is, no great shakes on the defense really either. So they're not considered a very good team. They're not even really considered the best team in the AFC. They've got the quarterback controversy. I believe after Vinatieri kicks the field goal, Bill Belichick turns to somebody and says, "Can you believe we won the Super Bowl with this team?" And the other thing too is that, and maybe this is a little bit personal for me because this is when I first got to Boston as a college student, September of 2001. Boston sports was not Boston sports then. They hadn't won a championship in 15 years since the 86 Celtics. Think about how many they would win in the next 15 years. So there's a lot going on there with this team, this franchise, Belichick, Brady. Plus, it's just a damn good game and a major upset.
Yeah, the Patriots get out to a 17-3 lead. There's a Ty Law's an interception return of Warner to give them the 7-3 lead early in the game. Then the Rams come charging back. They tie it at 17 with 1:30 left, and the Patriots get the ball. And the question is kind of like, are they doing the right thing here, or should they be killing the clock and playing for overtime? And again, remember, this is
the famous thing there is that John Madden explicitly says that they should not be doing what they're doing.
So they get into field goal range, and this is, again, Vinatieri, remember, 2 weeks before this, in the last game at the old Foxborough Stadium, he had kicked the field goals in the snow in the Tuck Rule game, the one to tie it, the one to win it. He comes out and buries a field goal on the last play of the game, and the Patriots win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I do think for all the reasons that I mentioned that this has to go on the list for a potential, maybe not one of the, I don't know how high on the list this will actually be because in a lot of ways, it's not a great back and forth game and that basically the Patriots do really well in the first half and the Rams do well in the second half. And then you got that drive, but this one warrants further consideration, I would say.
100%. I have the one 2 years later on there too, the Patriots and the Panthers. That was a fun game. There was so much scoring in that game. I mean, 32-29 doesn't knock your socks off, but it was, I think the passing in that game was, I think both teams had like crazy numbers of yards. Delhomme threw for 323 yards. Brady threw for 354 yards. They each threw 3 touchdowns. This game was tied at 7. The Patriots got up 21-14. It was in the fourth quarter alone. Going into the fourth quarter, it was 14-10 Patriots. They got up 21-10. Then the Panthers scored, made it 21-16. They missed a 2-point conversion. They scored another touchdown, made it 22-21, missed a 2-point conversion again. Patriots come up, score, get the 2-point conversion, make it 29-22 with 2:51 left. Then Delhomme takes them down the field, hits Ricky Prohl on a touchdown with 1:08 left to tie it at 29. Again, just like 2 years earlier, the Patriots go down. Brady gets them in range. Vinatieri hits a field goal. 32-29. Patriots win. Lots of action in this one.
And all basically in the second half. This game was 0-0 with 4 minutes left in
That's right, yeah.
With the Patriots score their first touchdown with 2:10 left in the second quarter.
3:05, I think.
You're right, 3:05. I'm sorry. God, I'm remembering this game now. This was crazy. Just the way
this was such a fun game. I was a senior in high school.
Yeah. So then, hold on. I got to pull up the box score for this game, the play-by-play.
Mhm.
This is Super Bowl
So, and 37 or no, 38.
38.
And while he's doing this, people had not started to hate the Patriots yet. It was getting close, but people had really not fully, because they won in 01, and then the next year they weren't any great shakes. They missed the playoffs. I think they went 9-7. They started 2003 0-2 or 0-1. They got killed in the first game though. And the question was sort of like, was that just a 1-year thing? And then they got on a roll and, won all those games. And then you had the Panthers equally coming out of nowhere. Julius Peppers became kind of a pop culture. He was referenced in a Nelly song. He was kind of like a big, phenomenon, might be a little bit strong, but they were a really, really, hot team at the time too.
Okay, yeah. So no scoring for the first quarter and most of the second quarter. Finally, with 3:10 left, Brady throws a 5-yard touchdown pass to Deion Branch, and then they get the extra point, so it's 7-0. Panthers get the ball back on their own 5-yard line with 2:58 left. They, on 3rd and 5, they get another completion to Prohl for 13, then to Muhsin Muhammad for 23, and then to Prohl for another 15, and then Delhomme throws it to Steve Smith for 39 yards to make it 7-7. Kick it back to the Patriots, and then Patriots have it on their own 22. Brady completes for 12 yards, and then to 52 yards to Deion Branch. He's got and then David Givens is sort of the star of this. David Givens gets 3 receptions for 12, 9, and then 5. So less than a minute of game time after the Panthers had tied it up, Patriots make it 14-7. Then they kick it off, and Stephen Davis gets the ball. They're at the Vinatieri kicks it off, and they must get something must happen here. How does this? So Vinatieri kicks off 35 yards. Oh, it's a crappy kickoff. Vinatieri only kicks at 35 yards, meaning that the Panthers have it basically at midfield. They run one play for 21 yards and then are able to kick a 51-yard field goal. So a game that with 3:10 left or 3:11 left was 0-0 is 14-10 at the half, and then they just keep going. No scores in the third quarter either. So then it goes back to this sort of stalemate, and then there are 5 touchdowns, probably almost on back-to-back possessions in the fourth quarter, and then the game-winning field goal by Vinatieri with 4 seconds left. So, yeah, this is a really, maybe a little underrated and a really exciting game. So I think it goes on the finalist list.
It's one of the most fun games I can remember. Now, maybe some of that's not having a rooting interest in it, particularly at that point, but that was one of the most fun games I can remember, Super Bowl wise.
So I did not have the following year's game, the Patriots and the Eagles. This was a really good game, but it was another one of those games.
We're not going to be able to constantly talk about the games we don't have on the list.
Just real quick, I was just going to say it's one of these games where it's only not on there. It's a good game, but the Eagles score and then have to try and get it back. And, it's never really actually a 1-score game, even if that's what the final score would have you believe it would be. So I did not have that one on there.
They did get the ball back with about 45 seconds, but not much time and all that. 40-41, nothing there. 42, the Giants and the Patriots goes on there. It goes forward. The objective point of view, the Patriots come in 18-0. It's the first time a team since 1972 is going for an undefeated season in the Super Bowl. By then, they are the fully formed Big Bad Patriots. That was the year with Spygate. They had broken every record in the book that year offensively. Brady, Moss, the offense overall. They were.
And that's the other thing that gets lost here is that this team had Randy Moss on it, maybe the second or third best wide receiver of all time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would go, well, he's past his prime. He had his best season. He had maybe 98 was better, but he was phenomenal. Brady broke the touchdown record that year. These two teams had played in week 17. The Patriots had beaten the Giants to get to 16-0, but the Giants gave them one of the best games anybody had given them all season. And I'm not going to sit here and say you had a feeling they would meet again, because I remember at the time saying if the Giants don't have to play the Cowboys, I think they can beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. I did not think the Giants could beat the Cowboys in the playoffs, and they did. So going into you had, just from a narrative standpoint, you had all of that. For the Giants, you had Eli Manning. His brother had just won the Super Bowl for the first time the year before. The Giants back in the Super Bowl for the first, I guess, only in 7 years, but hadn't won one in 17 years. This defense that had shook the hell out of Brady in week 17, now getting another chance. And then the game itself, the knock I've heard on this game is people who don't think there was enough action. I don't agree with that. Obviously, as a Giant fan, I am not objective about this. This is still one of the greatest days of my life. But I'll allow that as a fair knock. But I think you more than make up for that in the fourth quarter. The Giants take the lead finally. The Patriots go down the field. They have this surgical drive to the point where they're killing the clock before they've actually taken the lead, because they're so confident they're going to take the lead. Eli Manning comes out with just over 2 minutes left. You have the helmet catch, which is still one of the most iconic plays in the history of football, where he hits David Tyree. And then you have the Burris touchdown. And then the Giants, because then the Patriots get the ball with this record-breaking offense, and they still have, a few plays at it. So I think it's one of the best Super Bowls of all time, both game-wise and narrative-wise. And I think it goes on the list, and I think is objectively one of the most significant games of the last 30 years in the NFL.
Yep. The combination of the upset, the loss of the undefeated season, the Tyree catch, Patriots hadn't lost Super Bowl, all of those things. Absolutely. It goes on there, and I'm sure it will rate highly when we revisit for the list in a few minutes here. And I think, go ahead.
Do you have the next year on there?
I do. I think that game gets underrated a little bit, and I understand why, because it was right after the crazy Giant upset of the year before. This is Super Bowl 43. This is the Cardinals and the Cardinals and the Patriots. This is a victory for the Steelers. This is Mike Tomlin's Pittsburgh Steelers. Troy Polamalu's their only Hall of Famer, although Roethlisberger will get there. Edgar and James and Kurt Warner popping up yet again here. I think this is also John Madden's last game as a broadcaster, which is sort of an interesting note. Mm-hmm. And this is another one of those games that is decided very much in the closing minutes of the game. I'm just trying to pull up the scoring summary here, so just bear with me for one quick second here. Okay, go ahead.
While he's doing that, let's also mention this is the Arizona Cardinals in the Super Bowl, and how unfathomable that had been before this. Not even 10 years before that, as early as that year, this was considered pretty unfathomable. And then there was a confluence of things that led to them actually hosting the NFC Championship game. This is Kurt Warner, whose career was basically considered over a few years before this, making a Super Bowl. The most famous play in the game second most famous play in the game happened just before halftime. It was 10-7 Arizona, or excuse me, 10-7 Pittsburgh, but the Cardinals were driving to the point where they were going to at least tie the game on a field goal, if not take the lead. And James Harrison, well-adjusted individual, ends up with 100-yard interception return for a touchdown to what it seemed like may have not iced the game, but like at that point it was like, well, Arizona's not going to be able to recover from that at a 17-7 lead. But then, the second half happened, and Arizona did answer very, very strongly. They scored the next 16 points in the game. Yeah,
and it's only a Steelers' last touchdown to Santonio Holmes with like 30 seconds left that gets the win for Pittsburgh. So yeah, this game probably, because of what came after, and it wasn't in any way sort of a historic rivalry, and the Cardinals don't have a lot of history, but still, this game was a great, great game.
Yep. I think it goes on there. 09 I don't have on there. 10 I don't have on there. 11 I can't put another Giant Patriot game on the list, even though it was again a one possession game. The Giants had to come back at the end and take the lead. There's another sort of iconic play with Eli to Manningham. If we're going to be objective, I can't have the same game 2 years later or 4 years later advance.
No, and it does maybe suffer a little bit from that. Giants sort of struggled early in this game. I still remember you texting me saying, seriously, this is over. It was nice to think we could beat them again, but we can't. Giants are down 17.
I had some spirituous beverages.
Giants are down 17-9 at one point. Comeback. Ahmad Bradshaw scores with less than a minute left, sort of half on purpose, half. It was the Patriots were obviously letting them score, and Bradshaw sort of goes like he's going to kneel down, but then doesn't, and just sort of falls backward into the end zone. Yeah, this one gets dinged a little bit because we're only choosing 5, and it's basically a very similar to something that happened 4 years earlier. But I feel like you can't go through this without at least mentioning that.
Yeah, no, and again, if it was two different teams, and maybe I'm overcorrecting as a Giant fan, but there's one thing to beat the undefeated Patriots. It's another thing to beat what was probably the worst of the Patriots teams to make a Super Bowl. If you look back at that, they were lucky to get through the AFC Championship game that year. That was when the Ravens had the drop, and then I think Billy Cundiff missed the field goal.
I think you're right about that.
The drop that would have won the game and all that. So you just can't do it. 2012, the blackout game, the Ravens and the 49ers. Do you have that on there?
That was another one that I had as one to potentially talk about. This is Super Bowl 47. This is the one that's in New Orleans. Is this the first New Orleans Super Bowl after Hurricane Katrina? I think it probably is. Randy Moss is actually on this team too for the 49ers. Go ahead.
I was going to say 05 was Detroit, 06 was Miami, 07 was Arizona, 08 was, I want to say Miami again. It was definitely outside, maybe Tampa. I think Tampa, that one was 08. Yeah, I think it would have been New Orleans' first one since then.
So the big thing that the Super Bowl gets remembered for is that the lights go out during the game. And I think it's in the third quarter when the Ravens are up 28-6, right?
That I don't remember, but you're probably right.
So the Ravens, and this is the Harbaugh Bowl also. This is, John Harbaugh and Jim Harbaugh, coaching the 49ers and the Ravens respectively. Incidentally, we're recording this on the day that John Harbaugh takes the job with the Chargers, so the two have a chance to meet up in the NFL again, although not in the Super Bowl since they're in the same.
Controversial that John Harbaugh took the job with the Chargers as he's preparing to lead his team into the AFC Championship game.
Oh, did I mix those up? I'm sorry. Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers, John Harbaugh with the Ravens. My apologies. Yeah,
every brother team has one who's a little swifter on their feet. In this case, that would be John Harbaugh. Go ahead. Sorry.
So it's 28-6 when the power goes out, Ravens leading. And then from there, the 49ers go on this, touchdown by Crabtree, touchdown by Frank Gore, who's probably a future Hall of Famer. They make it 28-23, but then the Ravens get a field goal, go up 8. Colin Kaepernick scores a touchdown on a run. Then they missed the 2-point conversion that would have tied the game, and then Baltimore gets a field goal, and later they run out of the end zone for a safety to kill the clock at the end of the game. I feel like this one might just miss, but I actually think I feel worse about keeping this one off than I thought I would, because I think the combination of the comeback, the weirdness of the blackout, the Harbaughs, the fact that they're a 2-point conversion away from tying it up. This is a much better game. I knew it was a good game, but this game was sort of more up there than I even thought it would be. But maybe the lack of a real sort of back and forth, the lack of a real sort of memorable moment other than the power outage, maybe that takes it just down, although there was, 108-yard kickoff return for a touchdown in this game. So I guess
two guys who were brothers were coaching against each other, and there was a blackout. I don't think it ends up making the top 5, so I don't know if it matters to say we're passing it on, but it's definitely there. It's definitely a memorable game.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And also just, another, interesting. There's some of these games that just have so many different interesting stories in them. Also, the fact that Randy Moss was on the 49ers basically as a third receiver after having been retired for a year and was basically just a model citizen and just a guy who contributed. That's also kind of cool.
Yeah. Do you have the next year one as one of the worst ones? Because I didn't list it, but as I'm looking, I'm like, you could certainly make the argument for that.
This was the New York Super Bowl. This was Seahawks and the Broncos 43-8. I do. This was a game that was just never anything. At one point, the Seahawks were leading 36-0. I think there was a fumble on the very first play from scrimmage where the center basically messed up the snap and it goes right by Peyton Manning. This was Manning's by far his best year as a Bronco. Was this his first year with Denver? I think it was.
No, I think 12 was, because 12 was the year they were really good and the Ravens hit like a crazy Hail Mary in the divisional round. Because Manning would have been there 12, 13, 14, 15, Peyton Manning, because 11 was the year he missed the whole season. He was technically still on the Colts, but he had the neck injury. So then 12 was the year they were like the 1 seed and they lost to Denver, or they lost to Baltimore in the divisional round. 13, they got to the Super Bowl. 14, they lost to New England in the AFC Championship game. And then 15, they won the Super Bowl.
But this was Manning's best year as a Bronco. This was his MVP year. I think this was the year he set the record. This was the year he took that touchdown record back from Brady. Yeah, he had 55 touchdown passes at 37 years of age. Yeah, pretty good. I think that's why this to me was really one of the worst, was that you thought you were getting a good game and you just didn't. It was just terrible. I mean, this might be, first of all, I don't think anybody's, I'm trying to think of what the biggest Super Bowl droughts were. 36-0. Nobody's ever been down that much to nothing. I know that this is a 35-point loss, and the Bears Patriots was a 36-point loss, but there was not even a second where you thought this was going to be close. This game was 5-0 with 10 minutes left. The Seahawks defense or Seahawks offense hadn't even had to do anything yet. Really, the defense hadn't had to either. So I put this one on there, and I might put this one way on there, especially because you thought it was going to be a really good game.
Yeah, I think it has to go on there. I think I just kind of overlooked it. The next year, those same Seattle Seahawks are back, and now we have a return of the second leg of the Patriot thing. And this is February 1st, 2015, the 2014 season, the game made famous by the decision at the end for the Patriots, or by the Seahawks, to throw the ball instead of giving it to Marshawn Lynch. It was then intercepted, and the Patriots win.
This game is always close. It's only a more than a 1-score game for about how much time here? For about 3 minutes. I don't know, more than that. I'm sorry. Closer to about
almost a quarter.
4:54. 4:54 in the third quarter. The Seahawks go up 24-14, and then Patriots don't score till there's 7:55 left. Amendola scores to make it 24-21, and then they get the ball back, they score, and then there's the whole thing. Yeah, this to me is pretty high up there. The combination of the closeness of the game, the fact that the Patriots hadn't won a Super Bowl in 10 years, which gets really kind of lost in the shuffle of the whole thing. Plus, the Marshawn Lynch non-handoff and the interception by Wilson would be crazy enough. But then when you factor in, there was that just one of the all-time greatest catches in NFL history. And it was everybody that the Patriots were going to lose on a crazy play in the, this was Jermaine Curse. And he's being covered by Malcolm Butler. Both guys dive. Butler deflects it. Curse ends up catching the ball on the ground. And everybody's saying that the Patriots are going to lose a third Super Bowl in basically, 5 years or, 8 years, whatever it is, on a crazy, improbable catch. And then to end up winning it the way that they did, this to me is not only up there, it's pretty high up there.
I agree. Was watching this game on a Gamecast in the back of an ambulance on my way to the hospital. But I remember watching it on my phone, not watching it, but like following the Gamecast and being like, holy geez, I almost cursed. I'm sorry. Being like, wow, holy crap. The Seahawks just got like a huge play and they might win the game. And then seeing what I was like a couple of plays later, like, oh, they threw an interception. And it wasn't until 2 days later that I saw the highlights and saw exactly what did happen. But yeah, I think you have to put this up there.
Yeah. So the following year is 49, or that was just 49.
That
right
was
there.
49.
The following year is 50. That's Panthers and the Broncos. That's a nice story.
I didn't realize the final score of that game was as close as it was. We don't need to talk about it. I thought that was much more of a blowout than it was.
Yeah, it was one of those games where it was like you never felt like it was a blowout, but you never felt like it was particularly close either. So that was 50. And then in 51, we are back to the Patriots, and this is the Patriots and the Falcons. This is the famous 28-3 comeback game, a coin toss by former President and Mrs. George H.W. Bush, in case you were curious. Where do you? I mean, obviously, it's mentioning. I did not have this as one to move along, and in a way, I felt strange about that because it's such an improbable comeback, 28-3 in the third quarter. Patriots come back, but I don't know. Maybe I was just a little more biased because it felt like it was just a comeback rather than a back and forth. I mean, look, it's one of the greatest games in NFL history, but is it, one of the 5 to 7 greatest Super Bowls in history? I don't know.
I don't think it is. I would say we're kind of arbitrarily, I would say, oh, move it along, but I wouldn't. It's not going to be in the top 5. There was not a soul in this country who thought by overtime the Falcons were going to win that game.
And we should note that it's the first overtime Super Bowl.
Yes, I was about to note that. We have to discuss it as one of, the only Super Bowl that's gotten to overtime thus far. And, the biggest comeback, I've got to be the biggest comeback in Super Bowl history by quite a bit. But the legacy of this is almost more as a choke. Unless outside of the New England area, everyone else talks about this to the point where people troll Atlanta sports fans with 28-3, every now and then like the Saints Twitter or like, somebody playing the Braves in the playoffs will find some clever way to put 28-3 in a tweet or something like that. And I certainly
I think that the Patriots rings had 283 diamonds in them too.
Yeah, you can certainly call this like the crowning achievement of the Brady Patriots if you want to. As a game, by the time it was 28-20, to me, it was like, if the Patriots get the ball back, they're going to tie it and they're going to win. Now, again, you could say, oh, well, but, it felt it certainly by the time it got to overtime, it was inevitable. Maybe I'm being hypocritical. If you 100% flip the roles in this game, I think it might be in the top 5. But
absolutely.
I just can't get there. So great, obvious comeback. That's not to diminish what New England did. They're well represented on this list, both in their wins and their losses. Both lists, actually. Because in a minute, yeah, we're gonna have a Patriot win, a Patriot loss in both categories, at least in the next round, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, it's not as good a game as it could be, or it's not as held in high regard as you would think as the first overtime Super Bowl ever.
1 year later,
I didn't have it on my list. I don't know how. Go ahead.
No, what were you gonna say?
If you want to make the argument for it, you can. I don't know. Wasn't New England ahead, or wasn't Philadelphia ahead pretty comfortably most of the game?
I mean, not really. I mean, they were up by 10 a couple of times, but this is Philly and New England 41-33 in Super Bowl 52. But with the Patriots battle back, score a touchdown to go up by a point with about 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Eagles are doing this with a backup quarterback in Nick Foles. They score a touchdown on this Philly special, which is one of the best known plays in Super Bowl history, especially modern Super Bowl history. They run that play and do that after the Patriots had tried a very similar play on their own goal line a few drives earlier, and Brady had dropped the ball. They win the game 41-33. They have to retake the lead in the fourth quarter. Backup quarterback, like I said, first Eagles Super Bowl victory ever. 52 years in, they hadn't won an NFL title since 1960. Back and forth game, high scoring. I think this has got to be on there, and it's got to be on there pretty high, I think.
I agree, but wait, you're not talking about the best list, are you?
Yeah.
I have it on the worst.
It doesn't belong on the worst list.
Just society doesn't allow it to happen. In fairness, it is a good game. I don't know that I would have it in my top 5. In my day, we didn't have to resort to gimmickry to win games. But yes, it's certainly a legendary game that, if you sort of put your morality aside, it does bear some mention as a significant Super Bowl.
Yeah, 52. We that's got to get further conversation. So I had 53 as my last entry on my worst list. Even though it wasn't a blowout, this is Patriots 13, Rams 3. This game was just boring.
It also was so disappointing, because I remember saying to people going into that, say what you will about the Patriots, they play exciting Super Bowls. Every Super Bowl they play is close. Every Super Bowl they play is a good game that comes down to the wire. So, we're at least guaranteed that. And then it was 13-3. It wasn't a game that was ever the Rams almost, took the lead or whatever. Even at, for a game that I guess it was 3-3 going into the fourth quarter. So yeah, it was. Here's what I'll say: if it's going to be 3-3 going into the fourth quarter, you damn well better have a fun ending, and they did.
They did not.
No, they didn't. The Patriots had the ball till 1:12 left to hit a field goal and ice the game. But even if you say it was closer than I'm giving it credit for, it wasn't more exciting than I'm giving it credit for.
Here are some of the records that were set in this game. Most consecutive drives ending with a punt, 8 by the Rams. Fewest points scored by a winning team, 13 by the Patriots. Fewest touchdowns first 3 quarters, both teams, 0. Fewest touchdowns, both teams, game 1. Fewest points, first 3 quarters, both teams, 6. Fewest points, both teams, games, 16. They did set the record for longest punt, which I guess who the hell cares? Yeah, this was just, and again, maybe there's some of this that's like, recency, and I remember watching this game. But this, and it was funny actually, because this was during a time period where I had gotten a job back in DC, but my wife and I were still living in Boston, and I was scheduled to wake up very early the next morning to fly back to DC to start the work week. This was a hard game to stay up for when you had to get up at 5 o'clock so you could go to work in another city. It was like, what are we doing here? I mean, 0 points in the first 3 quarters. It's yeah, that's not, or no, was it 0 in the first 3 quarters? So I think that's what I said, wasn't it?
I think it was 3-3 going into the fourth quarter.
Oh, okay. So it was, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. There was 0 touchdowns in the first 3 quarters. That was what it was.
Only 1 touchdown.
Only 1 touchdown. Yeah, no, I can't. This is, at least some of these other games you can look at that they were boring, but they were blowouts. So at least you got to see a defense dominate, or you got to see a team with a high-powered offense. This is very high up there for me. This is a contender maybe for the top spot. So yeah, this moves on.
So we're left with 4. The 2 years after that, I don't think are in any kind of discussion. Chiefs 31, 49ers 20, Bucks 31, Chiefs 9. I don't have either of the last 2, even though they were both 3-point games. You could talk me in, I guess, to Rams Bengals 23-20. The Bengals had a chance at the end. I guess what happened is, as I got to these last 2, I'm looking at all of the ones that we've done before this and saying, I know I'm not going to have them in the top 5. So we could argue whether they bear some sort of mention, but and also I will acknowledge maybe we need a little more historical whatever, but not having that at the moment, I just don't see either of them in there.
Yeah, I had them both as potentials. I mean, 2 years ago, the Rams won the game on a touchdown with 1:20 left. They were down 7 halfway through the fourth quarter, and they weren't. I'm sorry, they were down 7 in the third quarter, and then they were down 4 for most of the fourth quarter. They needed a touchdown, a 79-yard drive where Stafford completes it to Cooper Kupp, the eventual MVP of the game. So a game where the winning touchdown isn't scored until 1:25 left. I have, I felt like that definitely had to be on there. And then you're right. Last year's game, it seems so recently, but it's the second win for this what's becoming a potentially a Chiefs dynasty. It's a game-winning field goal. Now, this is another one of those sort of like Super Bowl V where it was tied, so it's not as though it wouldn't have gone to overtime, but an 8 Butker with an 8 field goal, 27-yard field goal with 8 seconds left to win the game for the Chiefs. Philly leads for most of this game. In fact, I think Kansas City goes up 1 in the fourth. Kansas City goes up 8 in the fourth quarter, but prior to that, they hadn't had a lead, Kansas City. So, I think that maybe people, and I think they're going to start to realize it after the next couple of weeks. People don't necessarily realize just how much of a dynasty this Chiefs team has the potential to be. So you're right. Maybe since we're only doing 5, we sort of leave both of those off. But, you could make a really strong case for both of them.
Fair point. Very fair point. So it's going to be easier if we do the worst first.
I agree.
And here's the ones I have sort of listed as ones we considered. These aren't going to be in any particular order, but Cowboys, Bills, 93. Seahawks. Excuse me. Let me start this again because I got 2 different lists here. So I got Rams, Patriots, 2018. Seahawks, Broncos, 2013. Giants, Ravens, 2000. Cowboys, Bills, 92. 49ers, Broncos, 89, Bears, Patriots, 85, Raiders, Vikings, 76, and Raiders, Redskins, 83. Which ones of those do you have? What's that?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, do you have ones of those that you think definitely need to be in the top 5?
I think the Giants Ravens needs to be in the top 5. I think that Patriots Rams Super Bowl that we talked about needs to be in the top 5. And I think that Seahawks and the Broncos, that blowout from about 10 years ago, needs to be in the top 5.
Do you have to put Bears Patriots in there?
Yeah, you do.
All right. So then that leaves us we got 4 there. So then you got Cowboys, Bills, you got 49ers, Broncos, you got Raiders, Vikings, you got Raiders, Redskins. 49ers, Broncos has a lot of points, a lot of excitement.
I would probably go that Cowboys Bills Super Bowl just because it's so sloppy. And so that made it hard to watch because it wasn't like the Bears where it was like a dominating defense over the Patriots. It was just so sloppy. The Bills just kept throwing interceptions and fumbling. That's got to be on there for me too.
All right. So the 5 we got Rams Patriots 2018,
which is
Seahawks
Super Bowl 53.
Seahawks Broncos 2013 season,
Super Bowl 48.
Giants Ravens 2000 season,
Super Bowl 35.
Cowboys Bills 92 season,
Super Bowl 27.
and Bears Patriots 1985 season.
That's Super Bowl 20. And for my money, one of the 2 recent ones is the worst Super Bowl ever.
I agree. A big part of me wants to go Rams Patriots, and I think it's the game I enjoyed the least.
Yeah, I agree.
But I don't know if you can put that over a game that was 36-0.
Yeah, that might be the worst. But
theoretically, again, watching it, you knew it wasn't going to happen. Rams Patriots was a fumble or a pick 6 away from being tied late. So I think you go Seahawks Broncos 1. I think you go Rams Patriots 2.
Yeah, and then probably Ravens Giants 3.
All right, and that leaves us with Cowboys Bills and Bears Patriots. Which one's better?
Cowboys Bills because it was at least close for a little bit in the first quarter. You never thought the Patriots were going to have a chance against the Bears. Nobody on America thought that.
Here's our list. Number 5, Cowboys Bills. And these are getting progressively worse. Number 4, Bears Patriots. Number 3, Giants Ravens. Number 2, Rams Patriots. And number 1, Seahawks Broncos. Patriots the only team that makes 2 appearances there. Seahawks Broncos, Rams Patriots, Giants Ravens, Cowboys Bills, Bears Patriots. Yeah. All right. Well, they've been in the most, so that's fair.
They got a win and a loss in this one. And they'll probably have a win and a loss in the best column too.
All right. So now we go to good, and I think the first thing we got to do is kind of narrow this down to 7 or 8, and then go from there.
Or we could just say, what do we think the best? We could just say, what do we think the best is, and take it from there.
All right. I'm inclined to go with Giants Bills just because the last play was win or lose. Well, the second to last play. I also can't pretend I don't come to that from a point of view. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I would tend to agree with you. I would. That to me is, for all the reasons we mentioned, the field goal that was going to give one team a championship and cause the other team to lose, all the storylines going into it, all the storylines that came out of it, the Bills, Parcells, the Hostetler Sims thing. You want to put the backdrop of the war into it a little bit, that I wouldn't overestimate that, but I certainly think that could be considered a part of it. So to me, that yes, I would go 25 there.
All right. What do you think for number 2? What's in your thought process?
Number 2, for me was, I'm going to say Super Bowl 49, which was the Patriots Seahawks. Yeah.
The thing that's in a lot of ways similar to Giants Bills there is and it sounds stupid to say about the Super Bowl, but we know it's not true every year. Those were two heavyweight teams there. The Patriots were about to start their second leg of a dynasty. The Seahawks had won the Super Bowl the year before, were clearly good enough here to win their second straight Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Back and forth where it, not just back and forth, but back and forth where at any given time, it felt like the team, like either team could start to impose their will, and it didn't happen. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
one team's making a run, the other team cuts that off. It's not like the game we talked about with the Patriots and the Falcons, where once the Patriots got rolling, it was just a question. In that game, the Patriots were really playing against the clock. Could they do this before the time ran out? The Falcons were kind of, and you could also tell the Falcons were playing that game like, my God, I hope the clock runs out soon. This game, you put 10 more minutes on the clock in this game and think about what else happens in those 10 minutes. You know what I mean?
I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly
so
right.
I agree with that. I go with number 2 with them.
Giants, Patriots next, I would think.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm remiss to keep putting the Giants on here, but that game, we're at the point now where you got to have a great game and you got to have a narrative. And you can say that's not part of it, but it is. Where the thing that sets Giants Patriots apart from Steelers Cardinals the next year is the narrative. You know what I mean? And also, again, it becomes almost a cliche, but I still think that's the most famous play in Super Bowl history. The guy caught the ball with his helmet. Like, Patriots were undefeated going into that. The only scenario that's a problem with that is now we got to continue to hear about the 72 Dolphins.
What is that? Mad Dog said that?
Yeah, the next day.
Now we got to hear about $72.
Now I think he said from too. Now we got to keep hearing from the 72 Dolphins, please. But yeah, I'll go with the Giants Patriots number 3. The only pre-Patriot era, like post 2001 era ones that we really have on here are 49ers, Bengals, and Steelers, Cowboys in 75. I guess 97 Broncos, Packers.
Well, we have Super Bowl 5 too.
No, but I mean ones that I'm are in serious consideration.
Yeah, I think 5 deserves a little more consideration than you might think, just because it did come down to that last second field goal. But you're right, there wasn't really a narrative yet, and it was, to be fair, it was a very, very poorly played game. Yeah, I mean, I would go.
Also, the Cowboys won the next year, which maybe doesn't factor in, but kind of does, in my opinion.
I'm going to say. I'm going to say maybe that Patriot Rams Super Bowl because it was such an upset. Probably could be the next one. Rams were favored by 14 points in that game.
And just to put into context here now, we have 3 Patriot Super Bowls from that era on there, all justifiably. Yep. So yeah, I think you're right there. And then 5, I mean.
I would go 43 for 5. The Cardinals and the Steelers. That gets named as one of the best games of all time. I think as Giant fans, we might have a little bit of a skewed vision of it because of what happened the year before. But there was and
also the fact, I mean, I'll admit still to being like, I still think the Giants were the best team in football that year. They beat both of those teams that year. So there's still a little bit of that for me where I'm like, if the damn Giants were, but you're right. And again, there's a lot there too. There's, it's Mike Tomlin winning a Super Bowl after, taking over for Bill Cowher. They had already won one, so it's not Roethlisberger's first one, but it's Roethlisberger's second one. There's the whole thing with the Cardinals and Kurt Warner, and Edgar James was on that team, I want to say.
Yep.
Larry Fitzgerald. Yeah, I think I agree with you there.
And to be totally honest with you here, after the first 3, I could really take any of another half dozen or so. I could go Rams, Titans. I could go Niners, Bengals. I could go the first Steelers, Cowboys. I could even go that Colt Cowboy. I could certainly go Eagles, Philly. Really, after the first 3, you could pick any of two of like, a whole bunch of Patriots and Panthers was one that we talked about being great. So really, after you get past those first, to me, those first three are like the pantheon. After that, you could take any number of those and I wouldn't have too much of an issue.
All right. I think that's fair. So just to recap, number 5, Steelers, Cardinals, 2008.
43.
Number 4, Patriots, Rams, 2001.
36.
Number 3, Giants, Patriots, 2007.
42.
Number 2, Patriots, Seahawks, 2014.
49.
And number 1, Giants, Bills, 1990.
Super Bowl 25, the silver anniversary Super Bowl.
Yes, and now we are on to 58 in 2 weeks. So the last thing I'll say, because once again we've gone long. I hammered this at the beginning of the episode. Just remember, we are in a golden age of Super Bowls. Look at these Super Bowls in really the first 24 Super Bowls. How many of the first even go to 29, how many of the first 29 Super Bowls would be classified as a good game? 6, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So just remember that if we get and I don't think we will right now as we're recording this, it's the week before the conference championship games. If we get a 34-10 Super Bowl this year, just remember that used to be the norm.
Yeah, and that was a joke. I mean, that was like, the game's never any good anyway. And, it's a great day for friends and family. And if the game's good, great. But if it's not, that's okay too. You sort of look at our formative years, like a lot of blowouts by the 49ers, the Cowboys, the Redskins. The Giants had the one blowout, but like there were a lot more, sort of in our early years. That's why when that Packer Bronco game was tied in the fourth quarter, it was like, whoa, it's a good game. So yeah. All right. Well, this was fun. I would like to we have to do this with, we've done it with NBA finals. We've done it with conference championships in football. I want to do it with pre-1967 NFL championship games. And I also want to do it with World Series, although with World Series, we're going to have to figure out some way that we're not going through 125 years of history. I don't know whether that's just like, I don't know what the format for that would be. We'll figure out a way to do it so that
it would be twice as long as this. And this was 5 hours long. So, we're gonna have to do it by like quarter century. We're gonna have to make it like a 9-part episode. But yeah, so.
Yeah. Well, this was good. Hopefully this gets out just in time for the Super Bowl. We hope you enjoy that, and we hope you enjoyed this. And until next time, I'm Dan Newman.
And I'm Andrew Newman. Goodbye, old sports.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Join George Bozica, the president of the PFRA, and myself, John Bozica, each month for the Professional Football Researchers Association official podcast. We'll discuss the history of the game, the many names of the game, and so many different things for you, making the history of football not only entertaining, but fun at the same time, as we join you on the Sports History Network on the official PFRA podcast.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.